Quite possibly the first and last time I ever get a standing ovation. So, if there's one thing we know about technology is that technology changes our day-to-day behaviors. And what I've done over the past couple of years is to study what it is about technology that so profoundly affects our habits. And it turns out that our behaviors and these companies that affect our behaviors tend to follow a few common patterns, a few common characteristics. They start out as toys. They start out as these nice-to-haves. And within the span of just a few years, maybe a decade or so, they start profoundly changing our day-to-day routines. And they start touching hundreds of millions of people and start making hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars. Now, what are the usual suspects? Who do we think of when I give that definition? Shout it out. Apple? What else? Facebook. Yeah, there we go. There's the $133 billion toy that a decade later is touching 1 in every 8 people on the planet. What else? What else? I couldn't hear. Say it again? Lego. Okay, I was thinking more technology, but okay, that's another one. What are the more technology companies? Amazon. Yeah, another great example. Instagram, right? 12 people, 18 months, $1 billion acquisition. Right? Pinterest, perhaps. Snapchat. Snapchat just turned down a $3 billion offer from Zuckerberg. Wasn't enough for them. So what I've done over the past several years is to look for patterns, to try and understand what it is that we see time and time again in these companies, and what can we learn from them to help us improve our own product design so that we can form habits. Now, habits, quite simply, are behaviors that we do with little or no conscious thought. It's about 50% of the actions that we take every single day. And today in Silicon Valley, and in fact around the world, there's an upspring of these companies that are dedicated to improving people's lives by creating healthy habits. And I think we're on the precipice of an age where we can design habits for good, to help people live healthier, better, happier, richer lives. And so that's what I want to help you do today. And to do that, I'd like to share with you a design pattern called the hook model. The hook model, very simply, is an experience designed to connect your solution to your user's problem with enough frequency to form a habit. An experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And it turns out that these hooks, these patterns that we see time and time again in the products that we use habitually, follow these 4 basic steps: a trigger, an action, a reward, and an investment. So we're going to go through all 4 of these steps. Let's start first with the trigger phase. But before I do, no need to take pictures. You'll get a link for all these slides right after my presentation, so don't sweat it. So, okay, let's start with triggers. Now, when it comes to triggers, what I want you to know about changing behavior and forming habits is that we can't actually just create a habit. We can't create a behavior out of thin air and just will it to exist. It's not how behaviors change. The metaphor here to think about is a pearl. Does anybody know how a pearl is formed? How's a pearl formed? Grain of sand or some kind of irritant inside an oyster, and to protect itself, the oyster deposits layer upon layer upon layer of the substance called mother of pearl until the oyster is formed. And that's very similar to how we form new behaviors, right? There's very few instinctual behaviors that we come into the world knowing. We build these behaviors over time. We learn the alphabet so that we can read words, so that we can read sentences, so that we can make sense of novels. These are how behaviors are built. And so the foundation of these new behaviors, the foundation that these new habits are built upon, are called triggers. And it turns out that triggers come in 2 types, 2 flavors, if you will. External triggers and internal triggers. Now, external triggers, you're all very familiar with. You see these all over your environment. These are things that cue action, where the information for what to do next is in the trigger itself. Okay? So calls to action like a button that says click here or buy now, or a traffic cop that tells you what to do, or one of your buddies that tells you, hey, here's a great app you should download. All of these are examples of external triggers. The information for what to do next is in the trigger itself. You all know all about external triggers, but I think what product designers don't give enough thought to are internal triggers. Internal triggers. Turns out that internal triggers are the foundation of what we do next in terms of habit formation. So internal triggers are where the information for what to do next is prompted by an association in the user's mind. Okay? The information is prompted through an association in the user's mind, and they predict behavior just as reliably as those external triggers. So certain places, routines, situations, people, and the big one, emotions. Not only emotions, but a particular type of emotion. I'm referring to negative emotions. So what we do when we feel lonesome or bored or tired or curious or confused or fearful prompts our next action. And it's the basis of many of our habits. And part of the science that proved this was true was this study conducted a few years ago that showed that people with depression check email more. Now, why would that be? I gave this talk a few weeks ago, and somebody blurted out, well, that's because email makes us depressed, which I kind of actually like that. That may be true, but that's actually not what this study found. What this study concluded was that people with suffering from clinical depression feel what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the general population. And they're using the internet, they're using email to boost their mood in those minutes. Okay? Think about it in your own life. What technology do we use, what technology do many people use when we feel lonely? Facebook, of course. What do we do when we're unsure about pretty much anything? Before we actually think if we know the answer, we go ahead and Google it, of course. And what about when we're bored? Maybe 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we've got something really important we have to do that we don't feel like doing, YouTube, of course. We use YouTube, we go on Pinterest, we check news or sports scores, ESPN. There's lots and lots of solutions for the internal trigger of boredom. Now, that's a bit of pop psychology, but what do we do with this? How do we actually design better solutions, better products, knowing this information about the importance of knowing internal triggers? Well, we really have to start with that base of understanding what internal trigger, what itch are we going to scratch? Okay? It's fundamental. Let's take a look at Instagram over the past few years here. Instagram, by many accounts, forms pretty strong user habits. How many people here use Instagram frequently? Okay, great, a lot of people. Let's look at Instagram's external triggers. What channel did people use? How did people most people find out about Instagram for the first time? Facebook and Twitter, exactly. You saw something that someone posted on Facebook and Twitter, and you click the link to see more, to go to Instagram and check it out. After you install the app, now you've got the app icon itself. That's an external trigger. You also start getting notifications that tell you, hey, your friends are doing this and that. Those are external triggers. Now, you said you use Instagram frequently? What's your name? Shayna. So Shayna, if it's suitable for work, can you tell us the last thing you took a picture of with Instagram?
Yeah, actually, it was my sister.
Your sister. Okay. Did your sister say, take a picture of me with Instagram? No. What were you guys doing?
We were celebrating dinner. She got a PhD.
Oh, great. Your sister got a PhD. Congratulations to your sister. And you had this great dinner, and Shayna wanted to take a picture of that dinner. Now, I'm guessing that your sister, or you told me your sister and nor the dinner said, Shayna, take a picture of me with Instagram. And yet there was an association that the solution for capturing this moment in time, for holding it forever, was Instagram. Instagram wins. They formed an association with this moment in time. Now, Instagram did a whole lot of things right. This is one thing I think they did particularly well. They own this moment in time. What other company, by the way, comes to mind when I say the moment? Kodak, of course, the Kodak moment. And we were all children when these commercials were on TV and when they used to buy these big ads in Times Square. But you probably remember them, right? These Kodak Moment commercials, right? The puppy dog running through the grass, the children who would someday leave the empty nest. My favorite was Grandma blowing out her last birthday candles. You remember these ads, right? Why did Kodak spend billions of dollars over the span of almost 100 years to teach us the Kodak moment? They wanted to create an association with this singular moment in time. Instagram did the same thing by having users teach other users what the Instagram moment was. Okay? But Instagram is much more than just a way to capture pictures like Kodak is. Instagram is also a social network. So through repeated passes through the hook, we begin to associate it with other things, right? We begin to use it when we're bored, when we're lonesome, when we're curious, when we feel FOMO. What's FOMO? Anybody know? Fear of missing out. It's actually in the Merriam-Webster dictionary this year. Fear doesn't feel good. We don't like the feeling of fear of missing out. And the solution for many folks is opening up Instagram. Okay? So that's a very brief introduction to triggers. Let's talk about action phase. The action phase of the hook is the simplest behavior in anticipation of reward. The simplest behavior in anticipation of reward. And let me show you how simple I mean by simple. Something as simple as scrolling on Pinterest, just the action of scrolling. Or searching on Google, right? Just that act of a search. Or pushing the play button on YouTube. Simple, simple actions in anticipation of reward. It turns out that for singular behaviors, for singular actions, there's actually a formula to predict the likelihood of the user doing a particular action. And that formula that I like to share with you comes from B.J. Fogg. How many of you have seen this before? Okay. Oh, good. Not that many. Excellent. So B.J. Fogg is a researcher at Stanford. He runs the Keptology lab there. And Fogg posits that for any singular behavior, as represented by B, for any singular behavior, we need three things to be present for that behavior to occur. Sufficient motivation, sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is. And a trigger must be present. Okay? Motivation, ability, and a trigger. We just talked about triggers. Let's dive into motivation and ability. So motivation, according to Edward Deci, the father of self-determination theory, is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. Now, psychologists have argued for years and years and years about the nature of motivation, but I think there are these 6 simple levers that we can think of that Fogg posits that help us understand how we can increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring by increasing or decreasing these 6 factors. That we all seek pleasure and avoid pain. That we all seek hope and avoid fear. That we all seek social acceptance and we avoid social rejection. So there's lots and lots and lots to learn about this, but we're going to kind of gloss over it for right now. There's a lot more you can research online about it. What I'd like to talk about for a moment is the next part of Fogg's equation, ability. Now, ability is how difficult or easy a behavior is to do. And here again, we have 6 levers, 6 things that we can do to make a behavior more likely to occur by changing these 6 factors. So how much time something takes to do, how much money it costs, how much physical effort is associated with the behavior, how many brain cycles. This is a big one in technology products, brain cycles. The more difficult something is to understand, the more unlikely it is the user will do that behavior. It's called cognitive load. Okay? Simple to understand means more likely the user will do it. Social deviance. We increase the likelihood of doing a particular behavior when we see others like us doing it. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, non-routine. We become more likely to do a behavior simply for the fact that we've done it or something similar to it in the past. This is why habits have a repeater effect. The more we do something, the easier it becomes. What do we call this? What's this principle? Practice, right? The more we do something, the easier it becomes. Okay? So Fogg puts these 3 factors together. Sorry, the formatting got a little messed up here, but Fogg puts these 3 factors together into this nice graph that I think is actually quite useful in the context of a startup. And he posits that for any behavior to occur, we need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability. If something is easy to do, it's way over here. If something is hard to do, it's way over here. And a trigger must be present. So let's make this concrete. Think to yourself the last time that a telephone rang in your own life and you didn't pick up the phone. What's the reason you didn't pick up the phone? You don't know who it is, right? Maybe it's a telemarketer, or maybe you do know who it is and you don't want to pick it up. So that would be an example of low motivation. The phone is right there next to you, very easy to pick it up, but your motivation is too low. What's another reason? You're at a conference, perfect example, right? You're sitting here listening to me. To get up and take a call, there's kind of a bit of social deviance there. It's kind of awkward, right? It's too difficult to do. Even if you really want to take the call, your ability is too low. What's one more reason that has to do with triggers? Why you may not take, what's that? Exactly, the call was on silent and you didn't feel it, right? Or you didn't hear it, so no trigger was present. I can't tell you how many times I walk into these expensive design reviews and I'm there to see what's been made, and I tell the team, I don't know where you want me to click. Where's the trigger? Happens all the time, far too often. Let's take a look here at a quick case study of Twitter over the years. And let's think about how Twitter's evolved over the years in regard to motivation, ability, and triggers. So here's Twitter in 2009. Here's Twitter in 2010. And here's Twitter today. What do we see? What's different when it comes to motivation, ability, and triggers? Yeah?
Well, in 2009, you watched a video which was giving you context and creative motivation.
Yeah.
Now I get it. Go on.
Yeah, so there's a lot less stuff, first of all, right? Just a lot less information on the page. Look at the amount of triggers that was on the page in 2009, right? What was a trigger? Why was a trigger? How was a trigger? Watch a video was a trigger. Click here was a trigger. Sign in was a trigger. And get started join was a trigger. What do you want the user to do? What's the main point of this page? Sign in or sign up or open your damn mobile phone already and download the app. That's the main goal of the page. The intended behavior became more likely to occur because they removed the cognitive load. It became simpler to understand what to do. Okay? So the next phase of the hook model is the reward phase. So we figured out the user's itch, simplest action in anticipation of reward. Now it's time to scratch that itch, the reward phase. So when it comes to rewards, we have to start with a bit of neuroscience. We have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain studied by two researchers in the 1940s by the name of Olds and Milner, who discovered that when they implanted an electrode in the brains of lab animals, in this case mice, into a particular part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, and they connected that electrode to a little button, to a little lever that they allowed the lab animal to self-stimulate, that's all the animal wanted to do. They would forgo food, they would forgo water, they would run across electrified grids, anything to continue to self-stimulate the nucleus accumbens. In later experiments, they actually did the same with people, and they got the same results. They had to forcibly remove these machines from people to get them to stop clicking on them. It turns out that you don't need electrodes to stimulate the nucleus accumbens, that other things also activate this area of the brain. A good deal or certain things that we want to buy, certain chemicals, food, in particular junk food, sex, and right there in the middle, technology. All these things activate the nucleus accumbens. At the time, Olds and Milner believed that they had discovered the brain's pleasure center. Right? Why else would lab animals and later people continuously self-stimulate the nucleus accumbens if it wasn't because it felt good? Well, that wasn't exactly the case. We now know that they weren't stimulating pleasure per se. They were stimulating the stress of desire, craving, wanting, the itch. Because it turns out that the role of the nucleus accumbens is not necessarily to give us pleasure, but to create anticipation. And here's the study that proved it. So this study conducted at Stanford put people inside fMRI machines, looked at their blood flow as they were gambling, as they were playing a little wagering exercise. And they discovered that the nucleus accumbens became most activated in anticipation of the reward. Then when they got the thing that was supposed to make them happy, the payout, that area quelled and other areas became activated. So it turns out that our reward system is really wired around anticipation. It's all about this itch and the need to scratch that itch. Turns out that there's also a way to supercharge that stress of desire. Anybody want to know how? Anybody curious?
Yes.
Exactly. The unknown is fascinating. So when I took that little pause and I changed my cadence and I asked you a question, I did something a little different, right? I added a little bit of variability. And what we know about variability is that it causes us to increase focus, increase engagement, and oh yes, it's also very habit forming. Some of the science that you may be familiar with that actually proves this comes out of the work of B.F. Skinner, which you may remember from your Psych 101 class. Skinner took these pigeons, he put them in his famous Skinner boxes, and he let them press on a lever. And in his early experiments, the pigeons would click the lever and receive a food pellet, right? They'd receive a predictable reward. Then Skinner added a bit of variability, an intermittent reward. So a pigeon would click the lever, nothing would come out. Pigeon would click the lever again, and a pellet would come out. And when he introduced variability, that bit of mystery, the number of times the pigeon clicked the lever increased. The action was actually observed to occur more frequently. Why? Because variability spikes dopamine, the neurotransmitter that runs through the nucleus accumbens, and creates craving, creates wanting, creates anticipation. And it turns out that in the products that we use every day, that we find most habit-forming, most engaging, we find these three types of variable rewards. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. We find one or more of these three variable reward types. And let's dive in real quick to a few of them. Social rewards. You all know social rewards better than anyone. Rewards of the tribe. These are things that have an element of mystery, have an element of variability, feel good, and come from other people. So of course, great example, so these are examples like empathetic joy, feeling good for someone else. Partnership, competition, cooperation, sex, all of these things have an element of mystery, feel good, come from other people. Okay? Great example of this, of course, is social media. Where on Facebook, when Mark Zuckerberg got married, 1.3 million people liked it. Think about all the variability that's involved with a product like Facebook. What are people going to post? How many people are going to like it? What are the comments going to be? Very high degree of variability with what you might find every time you visit a product like Facebook. Stack Overflow, of course. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the product. How many people actually use Stack Overflow? Okay, a few of the engineers in the room. Stack Overflow, the world's largest technical question and answer site. 5,000 questions every single day get answered on this platform. And these are not easily Googleable answers, right? These answers take a lot of time to fill out. Why do people do it? This is technical documentation that people are doing for free. What's behind this? Well, what happens when you post an answer to Stack Overflow? What happens to your answer? It gets upvoted, right? Upvoted or downvoted. And those upvotes are turned into points, and those points are turned into badges, but these aren't badges that you just, pimp out your profile. That's not what Stack Overflow is about. It's about the fact that these badges denote status to your community. Right? How valuable you are to the people whose opinions you care about. Rewards of the tribe. The next type of variable reward type that we see time and time again in habit-forming products are around the search for resources, what I call rewards of the hunt. So rewards of the hunt stem from our primal desire to search for food and resources. And of course, in modern society, food is bought with money. So when many people think of variable rewards, they think of slot machines, right? Where the currency of the reward is, of course, money, right? Real currency. That's what comes out of these slot machines, right? What you may not consider as a variable reward around the hunt is the search for information. Why is the feed so darn popular today, right? Why does every product seem to have a feed? Instagram didn't used to have one, now they do. Well, let's think about this for a minute. Okay, that's not interesting, that's not interesting. Oh, but that's interesting. And to see more of these information rewards, what do I have to do? Just keep scrolling, right? So this becomes very similar to this. Variable rewards of the hunt associated with information rewards. Finally, the search for self-achievement, what I call rewards of the self. These are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, that have an element of mystery, but don't come from other people and aren't about material or information rewards. So the search for competency, consistency, mastery. If you're familiar with the work of Edward Deci and Richard Ryan around self-determination theory, or you've read Dan Pink's book, Drive, that's what all this is about, right? Things that feel good on our own, intrinsic motivators. So gameplay is a great example. Getting to the next level, the next achievement, playing on your own, these things feel good, have an element of mystery to them, and it's all about the need for consistency, control, and mastery. And if you think to yourself, you know what, I don't really play video games. I'm not much of a gamer. I don't really get that. I bet you play this game every day. clearing that one unread message, checking off your to-dos, right? This need for mastery, control, consistency, clearing that little jewel icon on an app you might be using. It's all about the search for rewards of the self. So, a bit of word of warning before you go off and say, great, we'll just add all kinds of variable rewards onto our product and it'll be super habit forming. We fundamentally have to make sure that the rewards are scratching the user's itch, right? That we're giving the user what they came for. If the reward is disconnected from the reason the user came to use the product in the first place, it doesn't work, right? It looks schmaltzy, it looks fake, and users don't use the product. The real goal of the variable reward phase is to scratch the user's itch and yet leave them wanting more, having a bit of mystery around what they might find the next time they engage with our product. Finally, the last step of the hook model is the investment phase, my favorite phase of the hook model, because I think it's the one that designers think about the least. It's the one where I think we have the most room for improvement when it comes to the design community. The investment phase is where the user does a bit of work in anticipation of future reward, not immediate rewards, about future rewards that make the next pass through the hook more likely. So these are bits of work the user does, the bits of investment that the user puts into the product to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. And there are two fundamental ways that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. The first is by loading the next trigger. We talked about external triggers earlier, things that give the user information for what to do next. Well, if you think about email, for example, I think one of the mother of habit-forming products, right, habit-forming technologies. If we map the hook through email, the action would be to open the email, to open your client. The variable rewards are actually all three, tribe, hunt, and self are in our emails, right? Who are we going to hear from? What's the information reward that we're going to see when we open our email? And then, of course, there's this completion mechanic. Now, what's the investment with email? What's the thing that we do in anticipation of a future reward that makes us more likely to use the product? Write someone, exactly. So every time I write someone, I'm increasing the likelihood of me using the product or the platform in the future. There's no immediate gratification to sending an email. I don't get badges and points. It's about the anticipation of a future reward, just like on MessageMe or an SMS service you might use, right? Every time I send someone a message, I'm loading the next trigger for one of these guys to bring me back to use the product in the future. Here's another example on Pinterest. When I invest in the Pin It button, when I put that Pin It button on my Chrome of my browser, I'm making it more likely that the next time I feel this need to save something that I see on the web that I want to keep, there's my external trigger. I've loaded the external trigger right there. By the way, what's the old habit that Pinterest is replacing every time you see something you want to save? What is it? Bookmarking, of course. Ever notice how convenient that is, that the old habit of bookmarking, that little star of bookmarking, is so close to the Pinterest Pin It button? The second way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook is through storing value. And this is one of the reasons I'm so excited to be working in technology products, is because when it comes to technology, unlike things that are made out of atoms, right, your phones and your computers and the chairs you're sitting on and everything in the physical world, these things depreciate. The more you use them, the more they lose value. Habit-forming technologies should appreciate. They should get more valuable with use by storing value. And let me show you some examples of how they do that. Content. Every time I put a piece of content into iTunes, into my library, it becomes my one and only source for all my music. The more content I put into it, the more valuable it becomes to me. Data. On a site like, or on a service like Mint.com or any personal finance software, the more data I put into the service, the more valuable it becomes to me. I can do more with the software. Followers. So the more followers I have on Twitter, the more valuable it becomes to me. The better it becomes as a medium to reach my audience. And then finally, reputation. So on sites like TaskRabbit or Airbnb or eBay, I can literally take this form of stored value to the bank. Why? Because I can sell my goods and services for a higher price based on the stored value of my reputation. And how likely am I to use a different service once I've built up that reputation, once I've stored value in this form? Pretty unlikely, right? It's kind of hard to leave. So to wrap up here, the hook model is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And through successive cycles, through these 4 steps of trigger, action, reward, and investment, users literally begin to change their preferences, their attitudes, and begin to form habits. Whew, that was a lot. So usually I teach this class in a one-day intensive. At Stanford, where I teach at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at the business school, we do this 3-week course. That was, what, 30 minutes that I just took up? 20 minutes? That's a lot. Thankfully, I just published a book called Hooked, which has a lot more information, a lot more depth about the examples I gave you. So I invite you to check that out or check out my blog. And fundamentally, I'd like you to take away these 5 steps, these 5 questions that you can ask of your product to ascertain the habit-forming potential of your product or service. And these questions start with number 1, what's the internal trigger that your product addresses? What's the user's itch? Number 2, what external trigger brings your user to the product? Number 3, the action. What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward, and how can we make it simpler? Number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work, the investment, done to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? So before I go, I need to touch on one more thing, the morality of manipulation. You know, these products that we're designing today have the potential to heavily influence people's day-to-day lives. And let's be honest with ourselves, design has an element of manipulation to it. We're designing a path for users to take the actions we want them to take. And I believe that today, designers have more opportunity to change user behavior than ever before. And I think it's a responsibility that we can't take lightly, because we're building the technologies that users take with them to bed. We're building the apps that users use before they say good morning to their loved ones. And as Ian Bogo said, these are the cigarettes of this century. So I think we have a very special responsibility to not build more cigarettes, but to help use habit-forming technology to help people live better, richer, happier, healthier lives by using the psychology of user behavior. You know, if there's one thing that we have no shortage of, it's problems to fix. And so I hope that with this information, you'll find something meaningful that can improve people's lives, and to borrow from the words of Gandhi, build the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much.